I Don't Get It
Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the I Don't Get It podcast. I think we have a very, very interesting topic today. If you guys saw the Paris Hilton documentary where she discusses her time being like kidnapped by basically a rehabilitation center for troubled teens.
Case it was kidnapping, as it was like her parents wanting to put her in jail.
Yeah, we all hear about troubled kids going into the mountains and trying to become good kids or whatever by the parents' standards. So we're going to talk to a man today who was actually put in one of those
camps,
what
I'd
do
say.
you even call them?
I don't know.
Camps?
Well, we'll ask him.
Yeah.
Yeah, a camp to not be gay anymore. His parents wanted him to not be gay.
So there's a whole bunch of
they
different
put
kinds, I believe.
Yes.
Like for for a whole bunch of things. Like just it says like in the stats that he sent us, there are over 6,000 children kept in residential treatment centers. That's what they call them.
It's crazy.
And
for behavior change and of all kinds.
Yeah,
and it's basically very much abuse is what we're coming to find out as years go on.
And what will be interesting, what I'm interested to ask him about is conversion therapy in general, which is so horrid and terrible. And it'd be interesting to hear like what it is
Yeah, like, what
and
does it
how
entail?
it goes down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure.
All right.
All right. We're going to get Joshua in, and he's going to tell us all about his experience and how he's campaigning to make this stop.
All right. Well, we got Joshua on the phone, and he is the author of a new book called Breaking Code Silence. And it's actually also the name of his foundation, his organization, that he has founded in order to help stop these camps. Well, okay. First question there, Josh. What should we call these in this discussion?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. So we term it, or it's been termed, the troubled teen industry because they're kind of primarily focused at vulnerable teens who their parents are really frustrated with their behavior or whatever. And so they're targeting like that troubled teen, if you will.
I feel like that's very Dr. Philly. I feel like Dr. Phil puts a lot of people or kids in these camps. That's immediately what I think of.
Wow.
So so can you tell us about your personal experience with these and like how you were basically kidnapped?
Yeah, for sure. So back in 2006, I was 16. I had just come out to my family as gay, and they kicked me out on the street, and I kind of like couch surfed for a little bit between my friends' houses. And 2 months later, my parents called me and said, hey, we want to meet. We want to talk about you coming home. So my mom picked me up, and I'm thinking this is, a great first step in the right direction. And we start driving, and she pulls over about 2 blocks from where she picked me up. And these two big guys step out of another car. They open our doors. They undo my seatbelt, rip me from the car. My mom's crying. She's emotional. They throw me in handcuffs and put me in the back of their car. And I didn't know at the time, but my dad was parked about a block away watching from his car. And at that point, grew up in San Diego. So we drove from San Diego to Vegas, hopped on a plane, flew up to Spokane, Washington, and then drove another 3 hours to Montana, where I spent the next year at this facility.
Did you know what was happening as soon as you got in the car and you were handcuffed? Like, did they tell you where you were going and who these
did
people
you even
were?
know that these existed at that point at 16 years old?
No. So like they didn't tell me anything. So as we're driving, towards Vegas, I was thinking like, oh, maybe they're taking me to like an intervention. Maybe they're taking me like to a therapist. Like I didn't know. And then 5 hours later, I'm like on a plane, and then it ends up being 3 a.m. and I'm in this trailer in Montana getting my head shaved. I'm getting strip searched. They're doing a cavity search, and I'm being like sexually harassed basically as they dig through my bags and kind of dehumanize you and take away your identity.
Did they say your parents arranged this?
Yeah.
Wait, what was the conversation like on the route and the traveling there? Like,
so they had like a folder of documents. They didn't really show me any of it, but what they did say did check out. My parents had hired them. They're a company that does this transportation service. And my parents signed over 51% custody to the school. So they were operating on behalf of my parents, and they had the right to do it. It's like basically a legal way of kidnapping your kids. And for most of the kids that get sent to these programs, they do it in the middle of the night. So these guys will just bust into your house and they'll rip you out of your bed. But because I wasn't living at home, they had to do it this way.
So that's exactly what happened to Paris Hilton in the Paris Hilton documentary that just came out a couple of months ago. She describes this one night in their New York City apartment, these guys barging in, and she thought, she said that she thought she was being robbed, and her parents were like, no, you're going with these guys, and they just grabbed her and pulled her out. And her sister, I think, had like a pretty scary reaction. She was terrified too
because she wasn't in the know. She didn't know that was happening. So she just saw these men grabbing her sister.
Yeah.
So the place where you went, was it like specific to conversion therapy?
No. So this is kind of what we as a nonprofit are trying to do, is like really cover all these loopholes, because there's 20 states right now that conversion therapy is illegal. However, these facilities operate under the guise of just behavioral modification. So you can send your kid there for anything. They could be bad in school. They could be doing drugs. Any reason. You send your kids there, and then it's really horrific. The troubled teen industry in general, like, it covers boot camps, wilderness programs, behavioral modification facilities, just kind of a blanket of different things, including conversion therapy. And the background of these programs and like the seminars that they do and the brainwashing that they do while you're in there was actually started back in the 70s with a cult called Synanon. And this cult ended up doing what was called attack therapy. So they basically gang up on you and beat you down. And then at the end of it, they like hug. And it's like their way of like basically brainwashing you to feel you did so good by like taking all this abuse. Now we're going to like support you and lift you up. So that was like the kind of daily, day-to-day environment that we were living in.
I want to take a second and talk to you guys about something that's like, I don't know if you guys feel this way, just like being on camera and being a podcaster, but for some reason, it's just so taboo for women to like embrace their sexuality and talk about things like vagina and periods. Like, do you ever feel that way, Ashley, where you're like, sort of feel like you have to censor yourself when it comes to like female sexuality?
Not really here on this podcast.
Not on this podcast. Sorry, in other areas.
I feel like it's very easy for men to be like, I'm gonna go jerk off. I'm gonna go watch porn.
Mostly when it comes to watching porn, or like any sort of thing that is supposed to turn you on, like anything sensual that's supposed to turn you on. But we're not like that here on the I Don't Get It podcast. You guys are listeners. You know how we are. We're pretty open about that stuff. And one of our favorite new ways to get turned on is,
right, and to embrace your sexuality and like explore your intimate desires. Is
this a company? It's called Femtasy. It's erotic short audio stories for women. They're ethically produced, and they're especially designed to satisfy female desire and provide pleasure. They're steamy fantasies that are narrated by both men and women, but it's just audio, so no images. So you kind of like turn yourself on through your own imagination.
Imagine like laying in a bubble bath at night. You have a glass of wine. You put one of these on. Whether it be a woman narrator or a male narrator, equally good, honestly. And there's kind of mentally getting yourself there, and then you can finish in any way you please. Ooh. But the fact that you can just mentally create these pictures, it's what's kind of sexy for women. You know,
totally.
It's good for our imaginations.
Because remember that saying that men fall in love through their eyes and women fall in love through their ears? Well, that applies here.
Exactly, guys. So you can listen to your fantasies and take time for yourself with Femtasy on www.femtasy.com. That's FEMTASY.com. TASY.com. There are over 500 audios exclusively for you guys to connect with yourself and to make the connection just more intense. Use our discount code GETIT. You can save 25% off on our annual subscription. Again, our code GETIT, and you guys will receive 25% off on our annual subscription. Love yourself all year long, anytime, anywhere. It's crazy that the Netflix documentary on this has yet to come out. It's crazy that I'm 31 and talking to you is the first time I'm talking to someone about this experience. I think the only thing I can remember in my head of hearing about this wasn't there a film with Lucas Hedges and Nicole Kidman, I think, where I forget what it was called, but she sent him to a camp. So you show up and you're in this trailer in Montana, and then what happens?
Yeah. So once they kind of stripped me of my identity, they put me in a uniform. They took away my personal belongings, dumped me into what they called your family. So it was just a group of about 20 guys that we all shared one cabin. And from that point, I mean, the abuse was daily. And me being a gay kid who's in a facility that isn't specifically for gay kids, there's kids there that were super homophobic. So I was not only getting abused by the staff, I was also getting abused by the fellow kids. And so I was being sexually harassed. I was being forced into hard labor as punishment. I mean, they would make us do anything from if you were kind of being hard on yourself, they'd say, oh, you're acting like a doormat. So every time we go into a new room, you're going to lay down and everyone in your family is going to walk over you. And then
physically, and actually, not verbally walk over you.
Yes, physically step on you. And that is the vanilla of this ice cream sundae of abuse. I mean, we're talking about, I remember one time I got in trouble because I had known about something that somebody else had done. I hadn't even done it myself, but they took us out. This was in the middle of winter up in the mountains. So 2 feet of snow, put us in sandals, shorts, and a t-shirt, and made us carry logs from one end of the football field to the other for an hour. And one kid ended up suffering frostbite because of it and having to go to the hospital. So it's I mean, the problem with these places, and this isn't something that just happened back in the 90s or the 2000s. These places are still in operation. We estimate that there's 1,000 facilities under the TTI umbrella still in operation today. An estimated 60,000 kids that are housed in these facilities right now.
Wow.
And
in just America or worldwide?
Just in the U.S., there was a number of facilities that were U.S. based that opened up international locations so that they could get around some of the government crackdown that they had. And that's the problem is the place I went, Spring Creek, closed down about 6 months after I was there. And the owners just popped up in other areas and opened new schools. So even when they do get kind of cracked down on, they end up just transferring the kids to other programs.
And so these places are legal.
Yes, 100%. There's little to no government oversight. What we're doing as a nonprofit, Breaking Code Silence, is really trying to start changing the public awareness of the issue, obviously first, and then tackle the legislation. So we actually had 2 recent big victories with that. We had the Utah State Bill 127, which kind of Paris Hilton actually went and spoke on behalf of the organization and on behalf of survivors as a community, and got that passed in the Senate there, which kind of created sweeping regulations for the state of Utah, which is huge because Utah is kind of a breeding ground for these programs.
Wow.
Why is that? So is it a very... Oh yeah, Utah. Why is that?
It just, they tend to be Utah, Montana, Arizona. They're just states that are very lax with their government oversight in terms of these programs. And usually we find that there's a religious exemption that allows them to operate with absolutely no oversight.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So we actually just passed a bill yesterday in Missouri that finally makes it so that any religious institution like this has to be accredited and they have to do federal background checks on their employees. And which you would think this is a no-brainer, they were even exempt from the state fire and safety hazard
What?
protocol. So now
Having all those people?
Yep. So now in Missouri, you know, any of these facilities not only have to be accredited and do background checks, but they also have to adhere to like the general safety, you know, things that any building or organization would have to adhere to.
That's like the kid that got frostbite. You bring him to the hospital. What do you say? Like, oh, we're doing because we didn't have any regulations on if a kid got frostbite and was physically in danger.
Yeah, so it's as our community, like breaking code silence. Why we're named that is because one of the first things that they impose on you is this vow of silence that what happens there stays there. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're named that, because we're empowering survivors to kind of, you know, break that code. And at Spring Creek specific, sorry, my voice is a little shaky. It's always emotional when we talk about this because it's so real. Yeah. So I apologize.
Yeah. It's honestly just so brave that you, when we were hearing you talk about like what happened with your mom and your dad being a block away, like the fact that you are willing to revisit this mentally and emotionally just to like help other people and passing, you know, all these laws, and it's honestly incredible. Like, thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, that's really what we're here for, is the kids who are still living this horrific experience today. That's what we're trying to end. But in terms of the like medical stuff, you know, like, yeah, we had this vow of silence, but what we found specifically at Spring Creek, and this has happened at other facilities too, is that they got the local economy was really bad. So they would open these facilities in really remote areas where they could employ or be the main employer in that city. That's what happened with Spring Creek. So the local doctors were actually starting to do medical procedures that were voluntary, and they were billing your parents as like, oh, your child got sick and had to go to the hospital. But in fact, like, they all of a sudden pulled me from my school class one day and said, hey, you're on our roster to go into town to see the doctor. And I was like, well, I'm not sick. I don't know what that's about. And they're like, well, hey, like, you don't really have a choice, so you go. And so I get there, and they literally put me down in the chair, didn't say a word to me. They shot me up with like 9 different vaccines. And my parents were very anti-vaccine, so I never had any.
Wow.
My parents had no idea that it was, and they didn't approve it. And then they sprayed like a local anesthetic on my forehead and my leg, and they removed moles and charged as a like non-invasive surgery. So what our assumption is, and we don't have the documents to prove this, but as more like ex-employees are coming forward, we're getting this information. They were basically charging the parents like, oh, you know, $2,000 for a medical procedure because he was sick and had to go to the ER. Wow. And then the school was taking $1,000 and the doctor was taking $1,000.
Oh my goodness.
They just looked and you're like, well, he needs vaccines and he has got a couple moles. So here's a free $2,000.
This is fucked.
Oh my gosh.
This is fucked.
It's super fucked. Yeah.
So Ashley and Lauren, it was my friend Sabrina's birthday, and I got her the most thoughtful present.
What was that?
So I pride myself on being very thoughtful. And there's this new company called NoteCube. It is so cool. So it's basically this wooden box, and you can get the person's name engraved on the top. And this is a gift for anyone. Like, it doesn't have to be a friend. It could be a family member, like your husband, wife, whoever. And it's so cool. So it comes with a stack of notes in the box. And on their website, you can put pictures on the back. You can actually edit. And all the thoughts are like really nice things. Like, so basically, this is how it went down. I went on the website, and then I checked marked all the things that she is, like trustworthy, loyal, like loving. And they already have notes for those things. So this is like for the extra lazy, thoughtful person, basically. but I obviously went a step further and like edited, some of the things they wrote, and I added pictures of her on the back. And when I gave it to her, she was like, this is the most thoughtful thing. And it's so cute because people can put it on their desk or anywhere. And when you're having a bad day, you just take a note and like read like what your friend or family member thinks about you.
That is very nice.
So cute.
That's nice.
That's a great idea for Father's Day, anniversaries, birthdays, weddings, Valentine's, like all the things. And it comes in an engraved wooden box. So that's really nice. It's a nice little keepsake item. And it looks like pretty out on your dresser, on your desk, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you guys, because you're I Don't Get It listeners, we have a special code for you for the next time you need to buy a thoughtful gift. You get 20% off using the code I Don't Get It. And you can get them at thenotecube.com. Free delivery worldwide. It's easy to create and it lasts a lifetime. So check it out. 20% off with the code I Don't Get It at thenotecube.com. So did your parents have any idea it was going to be like this? Or did they think that it genuinely could be a place to, quote, help you in the way that they wanted you to be helped? Did they think it could be violent in any way?
Yeah,
traumatizing?
No, I appreciate that question, because the parents are victims in this too, 100%. They are led to believe that this facility is going to be, character building, and it's going to help your child. And in my case, it's going to, quote unquote, fix your gay son. So they're led on with all these big promises that falls so short of that. And with the no government oversight, there's no way for these kids to actually submit a report when abuse happens. Mm-hmm. We had in Spring Creek specifically, we had girls who were getting pregnant by the staff. We had cases of rape. There was suicides that happened with the kids. A number of really egregious They had this spot called the Hobbit, and it was basically like a 5-foot by 10-foot room with neon fluorescent lights that were on all night. And you were given half diet, and you could be locked in there for weeks or even months. And it's just, you're put on isolation. And so your communication in and out is completely monitored and restricted. If you have good behavior, you might get a 15-minute phone call once a week with your parents.
And you would go into this hobbit hole when you did something bad, quote, quote?
Yeah. It was usually you were put on isolation because you did something bad. I was put in there one time because I kicked over a table. I was pissed one night because we had this, all night there was some guy who would sit in there at a desk in the room with a light on, and he would kind of watch everyone to make sure no one kills themselves or anything in the middle of the night. And so I just got so pissed because he would always bring this smelly, nasty food. And so there was one night where I was it was actually right after I had done the snow carrying the logs. And at that point, I was already level 0 points. Everything's a point system. So they dropped me down to nothing. And I was I have nothing to lose at this point. So I kicked over his table and was fuck you, Bob. And so they tackled me, restrained me, and then threw me in isolation for 3 days.
Wow, it's literally solitary confinement and torture. This is
it's stuff that we're not even legally allowed to do in our prison system. This type of abuse is illegal for adults, and yet it's going completely untalked about because of how controlling they are over these kids, and the parents are just gullible and desperate.
So, how long were you there, Josh? And you were 16?
I was 17 to 18 around that time. I was there exactly a year. My parents paid $80,000.
That was that was my next question.
A year? I'm thinking you're there a month.
It's like an Ivy League education.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's more than a year at Harvard.
Yeah, and we find that there's a number of kids who are sent to these places that are court ordered from the juvie system. And also when the foster care system is overloaded, they have been known to funnel kids into these programs too as a place to house them. So these are kids who have already faced an immense amount of adversity in their lives and are being funneled in, and the state is paying sometimes up to $600 a day for them.
What the fuck?
And they're in there for potentially years.
What is the program and curriculum, and how is progress according to their standard as the fucked up camp? How is progress tracked? When do you get to go home? Do your parents decide? Right. Do you decide? Are you taking tests? Are they evaluating you? Do they have psychologists coming and showing you Rorschach painting? What's going down?
Yeah. So in terms of like education in the school system, it's a lot of, at least I'll speak for my experiences. Spring Creek had donated homeschool books that were like from the 80s and 90s. So they were like super outdated curriculum. The accreditation was like really lax. It was through some like private religious school accreditation system. So it wasn't up to the local standards. And there's been a number of survivors from Spring Creek who have found that they can't even access their school records since the school's been shut down. They've trashed it all in a way to cover their tracks. And that a lot of people who are trying to apply for colleges and stuff after that, they didn't even meet the local state requirements, even though they graduated. In terms of like getting out of the program, like how do you complete that? They have a series of seminars that were based off of what that cult Symenon had taught, the attack therapy type situations. And so these seminars, you would go in it was about every month and a half, they would host the seminars. People from this company would come to the school and host it. And these are multi-day seminars that you're there for sometimes close to like 20 hours. So they sleep deprive you. They give you a limited amount of food. And then they do this attack therapy where they are ganging up on people. I remember in one of the seminars, they made a girl stand up and describe in detail how she was raped by her father. And then they blamed her because she was a whore and because she was presenting herself to her dad and creating opportunities for sexual abuse. And they beat her down and beat her down and beat her down. And then again, just like they do on a daily basis, the last day of that seminar, it's all like flowers and rainbows and love and lifting you back up so that you go back kind of completely like gaslit and brainwashed that like somehow that experience benefited you. So you have to graduate these seminars. And if you don't graduate, then they hold you back and you redo it. And that adds another 2 months on your program.
Oh my
So that's how they keep people there.
If anyone listening is struggling with PTSD, anxiety, depression, or a plethora of other mental health issues, we have a company for you, and we've talked about it many times. That's BetterHelp. And BetterHelp, you can talk to a licensed therapist at any hour of the day. You can talk to them on chat, text, FaceTime, call, and you don't have to wait in that uncomfortable waiting room where people are looking at you wondering, why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here? You can do it in the comfort of your own home.
And the service is available for clients worldwide. And they have a very broad range of expertise available, which you may not encounter in your own town. So they have licensed professional counselors who are specialized in anxiety, stress, depression, relationships, sleeping, trauma, anger, family conflicts, LGBTQ plus matters, grief, self-esteem. It's really professional, convenient, and affordable.
It's the best. And so many people have been using BetterHelp that they're actually recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. So friends, we want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/getit. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. It is May. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/getit.
Have you come across anyone like after coming out and writing your book and creating this organization that is still brainwashed that you went there with? Do you know anyone that's still under their like control mentally?
Oh yeah, 100%. Within our community, there's a little bit of division because when you're a child, and there's kids that are as young as 7 sent to these facilities. And when you're that young and you're still developing, so much of this becomes part of your identity. Mm-hmm. And we find that there's many people within the survivor community that not only don't want to speak out against it, they're actively in a mind space that this somehow benefited them. Mm. And they'll make excuses for it.
Which I wanted to ask you about, like how this has affected you. And did you know the gravity of the situation in the moment? You know how when you're a teenager, you're like, oh yeah, that was bad. Or a lot of people who have been through really traumatic experiences, whether it's sexual abuse and stuff, they don't understand what's happening, right? And then they grow up and they talk to friends and they're like, oh shit, I was abused. This was traumatic. So when was that moment for you? And did you realize it in the camp or was it years later?
For me personally, like, I definitely realized it while I was there. I mean, like my first experience of the camp was getting my head shaved and having to strip down and take a shower in front of someone.
I mean, it just sounds like concentration camp.
Oh yeah, 100%. And like, not to take anything away from like the Holocaust and all that,
Right,
but
yeah.
like there's so many similarities of the treatment and the abuse and the way that they treat. It's dehumanizing, which is exactly what they did in these concentration camps. Was they took away their identity, and separated them from their family and controlled them. I mean, there was no clocks, no watches, no sense of time. You weren't allowed to look out windows or you were punished. You had to finish your entire food. Like, otherwise you were deemed like self-harming because you were starving yourself. So I gained a lot of weight while I was there too. And it's just, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I think I realized it while I was there that like, this is 100% wrong. But I knew that I had to fake it to make it. So I would like go along with the seminars and play into like and that's the other thing is they would get part of the attack therapy is that, you know, they would do these group sessions where the whole family of boys would make a circle and then one person would stand in the middle and everyone would give them feedback. And part of that feedback was basically attacking them for getting them to like confess their sins, if you will, and then attacking them for it. And then
that sounds like NXIVM.
Giving them a hug. Yeah.
That sounds like NXIVM kind of, where they're like, you remember like the blackmail, like you have to tell me like a secret or something. I don't know if you guys watched The Vow on
I didn't
HBO.
watch the whole thing, but I guess the best way of thinking about this, or the mentality that rules the camps, is that it's like there's just a cult mentality, right? So it's just like the creators, the managers, they just believe that this stuff really does work, or is it really a money scheme?
Both. We've found that the people who are high up, like Spring Creek was part of a system of schools called WASP. It was WWASP, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs. We find that the high up people in that organization were 100% running this as like a pyramid scheme, and that they were, if your enrollments were going up or at least staying consistent, they were throwing more money back into the schools and back into the owners of the schools. Then they had these teen help places like 1-800-TEEN-HELP, where that's how my parents found out about this, is they would call to be like, hey, this is what my kid's struggling with. What should I do? They were paying these hotlines and websites to funnel kids into the schools. So they were getting like sign-up bonuses.
Major important question here. What are some things that parents can look out for on the internet when they're searching about how to help their teen stay out of trouble and for them not to get sucked into one of these?
Yeah, for sure. I think the best thing is to do your research, because there's, you know, whenever there's an organization, you need to look at the third party reviews and things that are going to validate if that's something that's actually going to help your child or hurt them. And there's so much available information online right now about these schools, but unfortunately parents are not doing their due diligence. And as we find that the public awareness of the issue is becoming more prevalent, these schools are now targeting systems like the foster care system and the juvenile detention system, because the government doesn't care. Like, as long as the child is housed, you know, they'll pay whatever. So we're finding that there's slowly being a transition in the trend of private paid funding for these kids going to actual public funding for these kids. And that's where the kids are coming from more and more today than they were, 20 years ago.
That's where your tax dollars are going. It's literal child abuse.
So instead of like the government paying for the kid to be in foster care, they're basically using these as if they're foster care?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, like, we just had a year anniversary this last month of the death of Cornelius Frederick, who was he was a foster care kid who got placed into one of these facilities in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 7 adult males, I think it was 7 or 8, that got on top of him to restrain him, and he ended up dying. And the school nurse, walked over and didn't even call 911 for 15 minutes. He laid there lifeless until she finally called 911. And so and it's all on camera, which is crazy because these, the problem is like the word doesn't get out, or a lot of times we think like, oh, that's just a foster care system. And that's kind of like the mentality in America is like, there's not much we can do about that. But the thing is, these facilities are for profit, and they're privately run, and there's no oversight. And if we can get them shut down and then address, the disparities in the foster care system and all that, that's, I think, what we as an organization are focused on, is just get these places shut down now, and then start addressing how we best handle these more difficult situations with kids and the foster care system and whatnot.
It's so funny when I think about like modern inventions. Like whenever I put my air conditioning on, I'm like, thank God for the person that invented this. Like, thank you God for being smart and like coming up with this. And I recently thought the same with the person who came up with ZocDoc, which I'm sure many of you listening have heard of by now. But when ZocDoc came out years ago, I was like, this is genius. Like, having to make a doctor's appointment is so annoying, and it made it so convenient. And now they have an app, and it's the easiest way to find a great doctor and instantly book an appointment. Instantly.
You guys, one time I went into the doctor's and I found out once I got there that they didn't accept insurance. And I'm like, oh,
your particular insurance or any insurance?
Knows any insurance in this case. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, then how much is it going to be? They're like, this much. And I was like, oh my God.
Like, that's too much.
Well, I'm embarrassed, but I guess I'll have the appointment, and then I'll just have to figure out my doctor life afterward. But you don't have to deal with that with ZocDoc, because it's the easiest place. It's a free app. The ZocDoc app. The ZocDoc app is the greatest way to find a doctor and instantly book an appointment. And you will be able to figure out with the app if they take your insurance. You can read verified patient reviews there. You can book an appointment. You can book an appointment that's in person or via video chat. And you never have to wait on hold with a receptionist again. Oh my gosh, my gyno, the reception time. It's a time. You hear that music for a while.
ZocDoc makes healthcare easy. Now is the time to prioritize your health. Go to ZocDoc.com/getit and download the ZocDoc app to sign up for free and book a top-rated doctor. Many are available as soon as today. That's ZocDoc.com/getit. So they have 51% of your custody, right? Mm-hmm. So do they essentially get to decide when you get to leave, because they have 51%? So they like say they're running low on admissions for that year or month. They'll be like, well, we'll keep him longer because we have that control.
I think they do it, but they do it in a way that's super manipulative, where they're basically feeding your parents information about your state of mind and how willing and cooperative you are. And they coerce the parents, because the parents are actually required in many of these cases to go through seminars as well. So my parents not only had to pay the $80,000 for my year, then they had to pay their own way through these seminars that were hosted at like hotel conference centers all over the country.
Brainwashing on both ends.
Yeah, brainwashing on both ends. And then they were encouraged to get my older siblings, my adult siblings, to come in. And when my adult siblings came in, they were pushing them, go get your friends. This is a life-changing seminar. So it was like, again, that cult mentality of like, this is how you have to live your life, and just soaking in the money and not putting, that's the problem, is they're not putting the money into the actual care of the kids. They're just pocketing it.
What a pyramid scheme, man. So you go home after a year, and I'm assuming, because you said you had to play the game, that the little contact you could have with your parents here and there, maybe you couldn't tell them everything that was going on. I'm curious to know. But when you get home, what was that conversation like, and what happened there a year later?
Yeah, so this was right around Prop 8 in California, when they were voting on the right to marry. And I came home, and there was all these vote yes on Prop 8 signs in the yard. So I felt like I was coming home to a certain level of kind of abuse again, you know, and in terms of like conversion therapy and whatnot.
You
And
mean,
so I ended
but
up,
I'm sorry, I know it's been a couple years. So with Prop 8, with your parents having signs that said yes to Prop 8, was that meaning that they were against gay marriage?
correct. Yeah. Yeah. So they, you know, I brought it up like right away. I'm like, you know, I'm coming home to that. Like, that's pretty abrasive. And they're like, hey, you know, well, you're welcome to put vote no signs on the other side of the lawn. And it ended up like 3 days after I got home, I was back on the streets.
After all of that, I mean,
yeah.
So did you ever reveal, when did you reveal to them what went down there?
It took me about 10 years to finally have the conversation with them, because I couldn't bring myself to really vocalize the level of abuse, and like the really graphic details of not just what happened to me, but what I witnessed in other people. You know, hearing someone be raped and the screams, or you know, watching your friends just get beat and you can't help them, or getting beat yourself and no one comes to help you. And then just the level of like fucked upness that these seminars had. There's actually one of our survivors, she did a short movie. It's on YouTube. It's about 18 minutes long. It's called Lifeboat. It came out in 2017. If you search Lifeboat 2017, it'll pop up. And I encourage anyone to watch it. It gives you a really good insight into how our daily like group therapy sessions were, and the amount of like fucked up brainwashing techniques that were used. And then you take that and you like times it by 1,000, and that's what the seminars were like, because it was so high pressure that you had to pass, otherwise, you know, you're stuck for another 2 months.
How did this affect you later in life? I think sometimes we go through things and then we try and do something, whether it's get in a relationship or we, you know, buy a home, whatever normal adult thing we're doing. And then all of a sudden there's a block, right? And you don't realize like, why am I struggling with this? Have you come across any of those things in your adult life that are tied back to you staying in that camp for a year?
Oh yeah. And there's not a lot of research about this. So like, that's kind of what we want to do as an org, is like get some scientists and stuff looking at the long-term effects. But I think a big thing that a lot of survivors face is nightmares, different forms of PTSD, anxiety, depression. We did a poll within our community the other day, and it was something like 90% of the people who responded to the poll had been in an abusive relationship post the program.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So it tends to the acceptable things that you accept as normal treatment tend to be a little bit more dark. I mean, personally, I was in a number of relationships that were fueled by alcohol, drugs, sex, and exploitation of sex. We find some survivors have turned to sex work, or, you know, for a while I did adult film when I first got out because I was homeless. I didn't know how to make money. I had a high school diploma from a junk school in Montana. And I was like, what am I going to do? You know, and opportunities present themselves. Oh, well, just do porn, or just, you know, do this or do that. And so we find that a lot of kids fall back, or survivors fall into drugs. And there's a growing list of kids who have taken their own lives post the program. I remember there was one kid. It breaks my heart because when I got to the program, he had already been there for like 3 years.
Oh no!
Wow.
And he was younger.
God.
Yeah, he was younger than me, and he was there until the school got shut down. And the first week he went home, he took his life, because a lot of these kids that have been there for long periods of time, they just don't know how to operate in like normal society, because you're living in this bubble that is so controlled, and you just don't know how to function properly. So we find that the rates of suicide and depression and all of this is way higher.
When did you feel like you got on your feet?
To be like totally honest, it's a process. I think I'm still learning. I think I'm still unpacking things that I put in boxes and didn't deal with yet. I think that finally, about the last 5 years, I've had a steady career, and that has given me like the financial availability to start unpacking some of those boxes and going to therapy and dealing with all that. So that has helped, but a lot of kids that come out don't have that financial stability and just find themselves, just fully wrapped up in it.
I'm so happy you said that, because it's a privilege to be able to deal with your mental health clearly in society, which is why I started Heartbroken. Is your program, does it also help people after they leave? Like, does it help survivors sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, adjust back to the real world, quote unquote?
Yeah. So
like a transition program, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So Breaking Code Silence, over the last couple of years has been mostly a Facebook community for basically the community of survivors. So it's been just kind of a support system. And we've only just now this last month gotten our nonprofit status. So we're still kind of developing our programs. We have 4 different areas. We're focusing on advocacy, awareness, legislation, and research. So we're trying to reach out into those main areas while still taking care of our community. So while like our main goal is to really take down this troubled teen industry and get these places shut down, and then also put into place regulations so that facilities that we can't shut down, like we're not going to shut down the entire foster care system. So we want to have regulations so that kids have the ability to report abuse, to have licensed therapists and all that available to them. So, so part of that like comprehensive plan is to 100% find ways to support our community. And we're growing like fast. The number of people that reach out to us daily and say, hey, I've never been able to talk about this. I mean, we're talking about adults in their 50s that suffered this abuse in the 70s that are just now saying, I'm talking about this for the first time because I actually don't feel alone anymore.
That's crazy.
It's a really exciting time for us.
I'm so
Do you
proud
feel
of
like
you.
a lot of that has to do with Paris Hilton?
Yeah, I mean, like we view Paris as like any other survivor. Like she
That's what I want to know. Like we're not putting her. I don't know. Like I don't want, just because she's famous doesn't take away from everyone else's stories, but she is
Bringing
able
a lot
to
of
get
attention.
awareness. And attention.
No,
Yeah,
we're so grateful for her platform and like her courage and strength that she has shown. And she's not the only one. Like we've had Kat Von D. We've had Bad Baby spoke out and is kind of heading the fight against Dr. Phil right now, and how he's kind of shuffled
Lauren
kids.
was right
I didn't
about
even know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. So is that a thing?
So Dr. Phil really does like suggest or suggest parents to send kids to these places?
Yeah, he still has a number of TTI facilities listed as a resource on his website.
No.
So he's been funneling kids in and I'm sure there's a money trail, and we're going to figure it out. We're going to find it out. But yeah, so in terms of, and Misha Oshirovich too is another one. He's kind of a rising actor right now in Hollywood. He was just in a scary movie. I can't remember. I think it was called Fright or Scary. I can't remember 100%. Sorry. But he's speaking out in terms of part of our LGBTQ community and how there's a huge amount of people within the survivor community that identify as LGBTQ. And I think it's because there's so many loopholes for parents to send their kids here without it qualifying as conversion therapy.
So let's talk about conversion therapy for a minute. Are all conversion therapy places like this, or
they're not legal in a lot of states, like you said before, right?
Yeah, there's 20 states right now that have made it completely illegal, but conversion therapy can happen in a number of different ways. There can be facilities like this that are residential centers where you live there, and those we find are the most abusive. There's also like outpatient types of conversion therapy, and then there's also types of conversion therapy that exist within churches where pastors are trying to act as therapists and convert you. And so our view is that any form of conversion therapy is a form of torture. And it's inhumane. Right. It's just inhumane.
Yeah.
And the cases, I mean, when you talk about conversion therapy specifically, it actually started back in 1899. There was a German scientist and psychiatrist who began experimenting through forced heterosexual sexual experiences, as well as shock therapy, and a number of other like hypnosis and really traumatizing experiences. Mm-hmm. That's how conversion therapy started. And at the time, it was meant to, if you were part of the elite white families and you had a son or daughter who was gay, you wanted to figure out a way to not stain the family name. So they were actually conducting these experiences or experiments on people of color and doing things like castrations, female circumcision,
lobotomies,
all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So that's like the history of how conversion therapy started. And over the last century, it kind of got changed and adapted into areas of therapy and areas of religious therapy services. So it's kind of like changed and adjusted over the years. Obviously, like people aren't doing the more medieval techniques these days, but we find that the techniques that they are using are still psychological abuse and in many cases sexual abuse. It's
just a different form. It's like how slavery is now prison. You know what I mean? Like it's just like a different form now, which is just so insane to me. Oh my God. Do you feel like, how did you come to terms with your own sexuality? Or were you always like, this is who I am? Or did your experience with your parents in this camp make you question who you are?
Yeah. I mean, I always knew it, but I was growing up in a really Christian conservative family that like, I knew I wasn't able to share that with them because I knew that it was going to be judged. So I always kind of knew it, but in terms of like, as an adult, like, I think, again, it's a process. Like I still have moments where I'm extremely insecure and extremely self-conscious and moments of, self-hate and looking in the mirror. And some days, you feel like a stud, and other days you're like, who is that person? You don't even know who they are, So I think mental health in general is a journey, and there's always going to be good days and bad days. But as long as you're making progress and you're talking about it and you're being open and honest with yourself, then you're making progress.
When you were in the facility, did you feel like you were being brainwashed? Were there times where you were like, oh, I'm giving into this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I knew that you had to fake it, but there were moments where it's so ingrained.
Line. Yeah.
I mean, it's so ingrained in everything they do, from walking to eating to sleeping. Like everything has a form and a function, and it's meant to control you. And so after a year, that does become normal. It does become survival instead of like faking it and going along with it. It gets ingrained in your head. And there's times too now where I have issues with relationships, even friendships, where I get really critical because we were taught so much through that attack therapy to criticize others, and that was helping them. And so I found in my personal relationships, sometimes I get really critical or judgmental. And in my mind, I'm trying to help them, and I end up ruining the relationship or the friendship.
Oh, there's so many layers to this that you've had to unfairly navigate through.
Do you have any relationship with your family now?
Yes, yes and no. It's really strained. When they first read my story and were hearing about this, they thought that I was doing this to somehow shame them or embarrass them. And so there's still that level, like what we talked last week, and there's still that level of embarrassment and shame. But at the same time, they're learning as the community speaks up. They're learning more about the levels of this, and they had no idea that this had been going on. Like we did a video a couple weeks ago that survivors were able to share their stories and thank Breaking Code Silence for the work we're doing. And they're seeing people who are their age, and they're like, we had no idea that this was so far reaching. We thought this was just one school, and it's an entire system that nobody is talking about.
Has the organization and the book done any, have you gotten any feedback from parents that say, thank you so much, I was about to send my kid to something like this, and then I realized what it was?
Yeah, we have a lot of parent outreach programs that are going on right now, and we're learning that as people do reach out, or they send their kid away in a moment of desperation, and then they find us and realize,
oh no,
oh snap, like what did I just do? Yeah, so we have an entire reporting team that is handling cases with minors and people who are still in the program, or parents that are dealing with this, and how to navigate reporting the abuse and pulling their kids out, finding the appropriate care that they need. So we have an entire team that's addressing that, and that's part of our advocacy team. So yeah, it's the work is nonstop. I mean, we're working hard.
So what can we do as our listeners? What can we do to help stop these camps?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that the first and foremost thing is just spreading the awareness that this stuff exists. And this stuff has been going on for so long that chances are you might know someone or be related to someone that might have experienced some form of this, but just doesn't talk about it. And so I think sharing this stuff is first and foremost. Like, we are across all the social media platforms. If people want to follow us, it's just Breaking Code Silence. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of that. We have posted daily stuff on our Facebook. That's where we have our support groups for survivors. If anyone has been through this and they want to reach out to us, we have our support group on there. And then, we're just working to get the word out. And as a part of that, slowly doing pushes to get legislation brought forward. And that's the hard part is you can't really do that until the public is aware and the public is behind you.
Yeah, and they're enraged by it, and we're like protesting outside of it. And what I don't even know if I can ask this, but in my head, I'm just like, what's stopping anyone from calling the cops and being like, I went there, I know there's some effed up shit going on there, I think you guys should check it out. Or like, at what point does the FBI get involved? Or maybe they are already investigating it. Like, I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
I mean, I would love if the FBI was involved.
Just a SWAT team goes in there. Yeah.
I know, without giving like tons of details, I know that there's a number of investigations into some of these people who have been like systemically running these, and they keep popping it up. So there are investigations. There's documentaries in the works right now. There's a lot of kind of moving parts to this that that are going on. But the problem is that they are legal entities, and they, within the state laws right now, they are able to operate. And so a lot of the law enforcement see the abuse as like specific instances. They don't see the entire system as abuse. And that's where we're trying to kind of change that. And a lot of times the local police are paid off, or their family members work there, or, it's like that's why they're really careful with where they open these schools, because they want it in a rural place where they can kind of get away with it all.
Jesus. So you call them schools. Can you tell us like what the day-to-day routine was for you?
Yeah, so we would wake up usually around 5 a.m. The lights would go on. You either were assigned a morning shower or an evening shower, and you got 2 minutes. So if you were the first one to go in, you were showering cold. You would put on your uniform. You would make your bed military style, stand at the end of your bed, and wait until everything was inspected. March, you had to stare at the person's head in front of you, and you had to be within arm's distance so you could touch them. If you were caught looking or diverting your eyes from the back of their head, you were given a consequence, and that could range from deduction of points to getting tackled and beat up.
How many points did you start each day with?
25.
Okay.
And to give you an idea, if you used a bad word or like diverted your eyes, that would dock off 5 points.
Oh my God.
And I mean, if you did something like look out a window, that was considered plans to escape, and that was a category 5 consequence, which meant that you were dropped no matter what level you were, because as you get more points, you gain levels. With levels, you get more freedoms and whatnot. So if you were like level 5, which is like the top, you could be the top person. If you look out a window, you're dropped to level 0 with 0 points.
That's like an involuntary action, practically.
Yeah, and you're not
you're
not even allowed to attend the seminars unless you're at least a level 2. So that's how they keep you there too. Is if you're continually losing points, you're not even going to get to go to the opportunities to be brainwashed and abused to get out.
And that's when you lose your shit, when you're at 0, and then you're just gonna lose your shit,
0,
basically, and stay at 0. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, we would get an hour where we could do like PT, like physical fitness type stuff, which usually was just like out on a basketball court, like there were some balls, and occasionally they would use that hour as punishment for the whole family. Like everyone had to keep moving, so you would just run in circles around for the whole hour. There was one time we got put on log treatment, which meant that the entire family had to carry a log, and it was never allowed to touch the ground. So even at night, we would all sleep on the ground instead of in our bunk beds and have the log on top of us. And if it touched the ground, we were punished, and like additional days were added onto it. There was also, this is one thing that we're really trying to address, is the psychological effects of putting someone on silence. So in our camp, they called it Black Cloud. If you were put on Black Cloud, if you talked to anyone or if anyone talked to you, they were given a category 5 consequence. So you would drop down to 0 again. And they would put people on Black Cloud for sometimes days, weeks, or even months, where you were completely cut off and could not even socialize with other kids.
You couldn't speak at all.
Could not speak at all. Otherwise, you were, again, anything from dropped a level to physically restrained, beat up, or put in the Hobbit or the isolation room. So we have been trying to address that as a human rights thing, is that if you are restricted from even communicating or socializing with friends, family, or a therapist, that is a serious form of abuse and should be looked at as a human rights issue.
That is so destructive. Like, even if you wake up, you don't talk to someone for a couple hours, you like forget how to talk. I can't even imagine a month or a week or a day.
That is
we find that that happened a significant amount in the wilderness programs, where they would take these kids and just drop them out in the wilderness, and they would have to fend for themselves. They had to learn how to make a fire. They had to basically eat like a can of beans a day. They weren't allowed to talk to anyone, and that was like standard protocol. And if they did talk, I talked to one guy the other day, and he was raped repeatedly for 3 months. His first 3 months there, every day by staff and other students, he was raped. And he would wake up and be forced to stand at the end of his bed for sometimes 15 hours. The only break he got was to go eat. And then they would take a bar of soap and put it in a sock and then beat him at the end of the night. To the point that his backside was black and bleeding. And that was daily, every single day for months. And we find that the more the programs are like distanced from somewhat of civilization, like these wilderness programs, the abuse is just way worse. And this is, again, like this isn't something that just happened once. This is stuff that's literally happening right now as we're having this conversation. There are kids in wilderness programs who are being raped, being sexually abused, being beat up. I mean, it's just wild that the government has not stepped in and done something about this.
Held against their will.
This is crazy.
How is it just like such a secret until now?
I think because of the background and how it was founded in this Synanon cult, the methods that they use literally brainwash survivors to never speak about it. That is what you are, from day one, sold this code of silence. that you're not allowed to talk about it. And if you talk about it, you're going to get punished. If you talk about it, you're manipulating, or you're lying to your parents, or, whatever. So we find that, again, like what we talked about earlier, a lot of these survivors come out and they're not at a place where they want to talk about it, or that they even acknowledge that what they went through was wrong. A lot of them come out and perpetuate this violence with their own families, or they go back and they work. There's many that get so brainwashed that they go back and get a job at the facilities and then continue the cycle of abuse with more kids.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Were there any friendships that formed while there? Did you guys lean on each other? Were you even allowed to talk shit about the institution?
Yeah, I mean, at Spring Creek, we were tight. There was like, not cliques or whatever, but there was a lot of kids in my family who didn't like me because I was gay. But there was a lot of them that didn't care, and we were tight. You talk about this other guy who was at the wilderness program, they weren't allowed to talk to each other at all. So they weren't even allowed to establish the relationships. But now as survivors, they're starting to reach out as they find each other, years later or weeks later, months later, as kids are still coming out of these programs. But yeah, I mean, we had a sense of camaraderie, and there were times, very rarely, that you would stand up for somebody else, but usually that came with a heavy cost. So you kind of had to just keep your mouth shut. And, if someone was getting sexually touched, beat up, whatever, you just had to sit there and accept that was acceptable. You weren't really allowed to speak up or report it.
It's just really unfathomable. And it's, thank God for people like you who've come out the other side, who are breaking that code of silence, creating, your nonprofit, helping survivors, spreading awareness. What is your ultimate best case scenario for this, Josh? Like what does your dream look like for all these places to get shut down? What is the end goal for you?
So our vision is to end all child abuse under congregate care. So any facility.
What's congregate mean?
So congregate care would mean basically anywhere where a group of kids are being housed residentially and cared for. Okay. So that is a pretty wide blanket statement. In a perfect world, we would love for there to be zero child abuse, period. So that's our vision, but really how we do that is, at least as an organization, we're really trying to go after these facilities that are doing really egregious acts, and get those shut down first, and then go after state regulations that are going to give the systems that are going to exist forever, like the juvie detention system, just provide them a better regulation and kind of guide, so that these kids have access to proper therapy, they have access to report things when there is abuse, and that they're treated with dignity and respect, because at the end of the day, that's really what this comes down to, is that these kids are dehumanized.
Where can people go to donate to Breaking Code Silence? So
we are officially a nonprofit in the state of California. We're waiting on our federal nonprofit status. So once that comes, then our donations will be tax exempt, or you can claim them as tax exempt.
Right.
So So with COVID, things have kind of slowed down. So they usually take a month or two. We're expecting that to come through in the next couple of months. So as of right now, just in a effort to be fully transparent, we're not accepting donations, just because we don't want to have that exchange of money and then potentially not get the federal for some reason. But we do expect that the federal will come through in the next couple months, and then we'll be opening up to public donations. So I would just encourage people to kind of follow us on Instagram, Facebook, all of that, Twitter. We even have a TikTok team that's sharing stories of survivors.
We love TikTok.
Yes. So just keep in touch. Follow our website. It's breakingcodesilence.org. And we'll definitely be making announcements about that. We already have a number of corporations and private donors who are pledging that when that does happen, they want to be the first ones to support us. So we're excited for that. It should be just a matter of weeks until we're doing that.
Well, we are so grateful for you to come on here and to just revisit all of that trauma from your past. That is not easy. And I know that you've kind of taken it on as your job. Right. And that has got to be very emotionally taxing, but we really appreciate it.
This has been
educated
so wild,
thousands.
And eye-opening. I'm gonna, and anyone listening, have conversations with people about it. You know, read more into it, and I hope these documentaries come out. I feel like that's the way that people start really getting passionate, you know, about things. So, like Ashley said, thanks for all that you do.
No, thank you guys. I've listened to some of your podcasts, and like I love how casual and fun the conversations are, and it's so necessary that you take a step back sometimes and talk about the things that, you know, are a little bit more grungy, and we don't it's not always comfortable to have these conversations, but it's so needed and so necessary. And so I thank you guys for bringing me on and giving us a platform to talk about this.
Absolutely.
And,
Always. We're always open to it.
Thank you.
We like to do a little bit of a balance, you know, some girl talk and then some
heavy duty stuff.
Well, I mean, this is like the biggest, one of the most important I don't get it, you know. This is a massive I don't get it.
Yeah.
So thanks, Josh.
Thanks
thank
so
you
much.
guys.
So much.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.
I don't get it.
Podcast.